and keyframes in Sony Vegas Pro. Now, it's worth saying that we've already looked at keyframes and animation when we looked at event pan crop. If you remember, wherever we had our current time indicator and we made a change, it created a little diamond which was a keyframe saying change between this point and that point. And transition or change happened over time between the first keyframe and the next keyframe. Now, this can be a bit of a pain if you aren't at the beginning of a clip when you make a change and you want it to be the same all the way through a clip, because it will change over time. If you do make a mistake like that, go back to the beginning and select the keyframe that's causing you a problem and just hit delete and it should be okay. But this was spring-loaded animation. In other words, no matter what you do, it's going to animate when you make a change. Whereas the other type of animation, which is found under effects that you add, is actually an animation where you decide whether you want to animate something or not. So what we call this is an animation toggle. You click this little clock item here to say, I am going to be animating from this point onwards. Okay, so you don't click the toggle if you don't want to do any animation. You just set the value. So if it's not going to change over time, you are just setting the value. But if you want it to change over time, and clearly I've got foreground opacity here, there's nothing to see and I want it to reveal, just as an example, then I do want it to change over time. So therefore I say to Sony Vegas Pro, let's animate this item, and I click on the clock icon. I don't then click again to add additional keyframes. Once I've clicked this icon and it's down and it's enabled, whenever I make a change and I have moved my playhead, I've moved the cursor, then it will automatically create the keyframes that I require. Now, just for demonstration purposes, I'm actually going to also animate the roundness. If you look at the clip here, I know you can't see anything, but if I take roundness all the way up, you can see it does make a difference, so there's a visible difference for you to see. So I just want to show you how this works. So I'm going to click the clock icon for foreground opacity and for roundness. And as I do that, I get something happening down here. These are my animation lanes, and what you'll see here is I've got a keyframe, a diamond at the top, and then the actual points of animation for the roundness and for the foreground opacity actually shown here. So I'm just going to pull those in a bit so you can see them there. Now, you can change the type of keyframes that you've got. So I'll just go back over them. You can change the type of keyframes you've got, not at the top here. If I right click on there, you'll see that they're all grayed out. But you can change the type of keyframe when you select them down here in these lanes, right click on them, then you can change its type. But we'll have a little look. There's a kind of a gotcha that you need to know. There's also a different way of viewing them, and that's with something called curves. But we'll come back to curves in just a minute. We'll do a bit of animation. So I'm just going to go forward a little bit to about here. And at this point, I'm going to turn the foreground opacity fully on, and I'm going to take the roundness fully up. Okay, so I've actually got some animation taking place here. Okay, now you can see that I've got the various bits and pieces selectable, so I can actually select on these ones here. They're a little bit hard to get hold of, so you just need to be a little bit careful on actually selecting them, and you can see that the animation is taking place. However, if I right click on one of these and make a change, say do a smooth fade, nothing happens. Because it's always the keyframes that go into an event that have to change. So it should be these two that I'm changing to get a different look. If I go here and change, say, this one here, can you see I've now got a curve on this line? The curve is there because this keyframe leads into this one. So if I want this line to change, I need to change this keyframe, right click on it, and choose smooth fade, and then I've got a smooth animation. And you can see the different types. You can see the difference between a fast fade, which quickly comes in, versus a slow fade, which slowly comes in, just by right clicking, having a look at the way the lines actually change. Fast fade, so you can see the different way these lines work. So if I was to change this keyframe again, nothing would happen, but if I change this keyframe here for the roundness, it's selected. They're a little bit fiddly to get hold of, if I'm honest, but right click on that and I was to choose a sharp fade, you can see that's come up very quickly. So that's how you can change them. No point doing the second one unless you're going to have a third keyframe. Okay, so if I come to this point and I was to take my roundness all the way down again, I haven't got any change on this line. It is linear because I've not changed this keyframe. Select it. As I say, you have to select the circles, not the diamonds. Right click and take it down to, again, I haven't got it. Make sure you get it, as I say, they are fiddly, got the white line around it, it's selected, right click on it, do a hold keyframe. Now a hold keyframe is an unusual type of keyframe in that it says you must not change value until you encounter another keyframe, and then the change must be instant. So it goes all the way along until it hits the next keyframe and I can change where it is, and instantly it goes bang. 100% change immediately. No going up and going down, a complete change. Now this is really brilliant if you were doing things like animating text and you wanted text to flash on screen, or you want an item to jump about the screen. You could do it with the position. For example, when we were doing pan crop, you could actually go in, you can right click a keyframe and you can take that to hold, and then when you go a bit further in time, say I went to here and I was to shift things around to over here, okay, it's now a hold keyframe, and all it does is literally stay where it is and jump. So it's sort of a jump keyframe, so it's a jump to go from one place to another. So hold keyframes have got a very specific function, but you can always undo it by selecting it, get that little white circle around it and go down and take it to a different look, so a smooth fade for example. Lanes and curves are just two ways of seeing the same thing. So if I go to curves, you can actually see the curves in a more exaggerated way. And so you can see the way things are changing. So foreground opacity and roundness, if I click on that one, they are even harder to get hold of here, so be careful. Got it that time. But if you move slightly and you right click on it, occasionally you can lose it. Do a slow fade. Again, you can get a slightly more exaggerated look. And remember, it's always the first one. Now you see, I told you how hard to get hold of. You can try and click where you know it is, got it that time, or just click on the name to actually bring the appropriate curve forward. So let's actually do roundness, and if I right click on the roundness one, that firstly selects it, the second right click will allow me to then go in and say do a smooth fade. Okay, so they're just different ways of seeing and accessing these points and making changes. These are curves, so we can change the curves, we can see how they look. Again, I can select that, first right click selects it, missed it. Got it. So they're quite hard to get. So first click selects it. Nope, didn't quite get it. So you can see how hard it is. Got it that time. Now I can right click on it and I can change it to a slow fade. Okay, so you can see that these are the ways of changing things. If you want to add a keyframe in, so I want to add a keyframe in, decide what you want to add it to, and then I can say add a keyframe there. And then this keyframe is affecting this line. You can see it's now linear along here. Select it, right click on it, change it to a sharp fade. Okay, so this is how you can change your keyframes, and you can see them. Lanes and curves work in a different way. They are doing the same thing, with just different ways of seeing the same information. So you can see curves gives you a bigger view. If you want an even bigger view, you can actually stretch this out to get a much bigger view and see how it's going. But when you go to lanes, it'll always just be the lanes that go along here. The final thing to say is, have you noticed the colours? Have you noticed that we've got pink, yellows and blues? This is to indicate the type of keyframe it is. So if I right click on this one here and I change that to a linear fade, it's just grey. Right click it and go to a smooth fade, it's sort of a bluey purple, and then a fast fade, it's going to be a green, and right again, and then a slow fade is going to be sort of a tan colour, and sharp fade is the pink that we've seen, and a whole keyframe I think are the red ones. So as you can see, the colours indicate the type of keyframes they are. When I go to curves, I don't have that same feedback. I don't actually have the type of keyframe indicated by colours, whereas in lanes I do have them indicated by colours, and the more you get to use this, the quicker you learn which is which. So I can look at this and say, oh, so that's that type of keyframe and this is another type of keyframe. But the giveaway, to be honest with you, is actually the shape of the curve. And you can see that's going to come in relatively quickly, stay fairly calm in the middle, and then go quickly in to the actual point there. So you can get a feel for what's actually going to take place in your animation just by looking at the lines. So this is animation and keyframe types inside of Sony Vegas Pro. Very powerful, very useful, and it's lovely that it gives us two different ways of seeing the same thing. I hope you found this tutorial useful. My name's Andrew Davis, and thank you.